standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Children's stories like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland now come with a trigger warning at universities, alerting readers to possible themes of white supremacy.
Yes,
quote,
these
unquote.
warnings are being applied to colonial narratives. That's the claim, commonly found in adventure stories and famous novels from the Victorian era. Well, joining us now is the actor Charlie Lawson. And Charlie, these warnings have been applied to Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. What's this university getting at?
Well, look, first of all, this is nothing new. We hadn't heard about it for a while. Universities have been doing this over the last couple of years. I remember having a chat with one of your colleagues. But when Gabriella, the lovely Gabby, phoned me up today, I had to beg her to put me on after 9 o'clock because I found myself getting rather irate about the whole thing. But I will do my best to be very polite.
Yes, keep it clean.
Yes, look, which is quite difficult for me, as you'll appreciate, over this subject. Look, this is universities just jumping on the same trying to be relevant bandwagon. Is it any wonder that we look at the quality of graduates from university, and in my humble opinion, some of them are slightly disappointing. But I did phone a couple of people I knew who had sons and daughters at various leading universities, and they had been speaking this morning. And thank the Lord, they think it's a complete load of bloody nonsense, as I do. Give the C.S. Lewis Centre a ring in East Belfast, because that's where your man came from. And I think you'll find you'll get short shrift, because we're not all about that in East Belfast. We don't censor anything.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, you're watching and listening to GB News. I'm Tamsin Roberts. Here are the headlines at 11. Well, first to the latest developments from Westminster, where MPs have again voted to reject the latest Lords' amendment to the Rwanda bill. The final change the Lords added to the bill would have required that Rwanda couldn't be treated as safe until ministers consulted with an independent monitoring group and made a statement to Parliament. The bill's now been sent back to the House of Lords again. But tonight's political ping-pong wasn't without its mishaps. This was the moment the lights went out in the House of Lords.
Oh, I must have said something very controversial. But I've still got a light, so yes, thank you.
Well, tonight's showdown between the two houses comes after the Prime Minister declared earlier that enough is enough and said MPs and peers will sit through the night to get the bill passed. Well, we've just learnt the Prime Minister is set to announce the UK's largest ever package of aid for Ukraine during visits to Warsaw and Berlin tomorrow. The £500 million pledge comes as the Prime Minister warns that Vladimir Putin will not stop at the Polish border if his assault on Ukraine is not stopped. The funding includes ammunition, air defence, drones and engineering support. It means the UK commitment to Ukraine so far since the 2022 invasion totals £7.6 billion. To the US now, and prosecutors have told a court that Donald Trump's alleged cover-up of a hush money payment to a porn star did break the law. Sparse crowds greeted Trump at the New York courthouse despite his call for nationwide yet peaceful protests. It's the first ever criminal trial of a former US president and comes amid Trump's election rematch with Joe Biden. Prosecutors argue his $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels deceived voters during the presidential campaign in 2016. Donald Trump denies any wrongdoing.
The judge had no idea what was happening. And this is the same judge that 2 months ago made a ruling that shook the world. It shook the world because everyone knows going to that trial I did nothing wrong. And over here, I did nothing wrong also. This is a Biden witch hunt to keep me off the campaign trail. So far, it's not working because my poll numbers are higher than they've ever been because the public understands that it's a witch hunt.
A former parliamentary researcher and another man have been charged with spying for China after an investigation by counter-terrorism police. 29-year-old Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry, who's 32, have been charged under the Official Secrets Act. Both have been bailed and will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on Friday. The Metropolitan Police say the allegations are very serious. Train drivers at 16 rail companies have announced a fresh series of strikes in their long-running pay dispute, disrupting travel over the May bank holiday. Members of ASLEF will walk out on the 7th, 8th and 9th of May at different operators and ban overtime for 6 days the same week. The union's accusing the government of giving up trying to resolve the near 2-year dispute. But a spokesperson for the Department for Transport says ASLEF are acting like a broken record, refusing to put a fair and reasonable pay offer to its members. Those are the headlines, and for the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's time for Headliners.
Hello and welcome to Headliners. On tonight's panel, we've got Mediterranean warmth combined with strong British values. That's Nicholas DeSanto and Nick Dixon. Evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
I'm not sure it's wise to combine those two, of course.
I have the same values as Nick does.
Of course you do, and
well, hang on,
Nick has the same values as you.
Let's not get carried away. Some of your values are a bit more extreme.
You're both very much people of the book, though, I think, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't know which book it is with.
I love this idea that people think that they can take a little bit of Mediterranean and mingle it with a little bit of the Cumbrian.
Yeah, but you're Iranian, aren't you, really, Nicholas?
Well,
Italian.
Genetically, yeah. But...
I only care about the genetics.
Genetically Persian.
Yeah.
Did you say? Yeah, I did not know that. OK, interesting.
Still good enough.
He was the one that ordered the drone strike.
Like an entire one-man ancient civilization. Let's have a look at the front pages. Daily Mail kick us off. Enough is enough. We're ready for Rwanda liftoff. The Telegraph also have Rwanda migrants to be detained within day. Guardian, Met Police Chief praises conduct of officer in anti-Semitism row. The Mirror have the face of a killer, Jill Dando specifically. iNews, Rwanda plan won't work, Tory critics tell Sunak. And finally, the Daily Star, Britain's hardest psycho seagull. Yeah, well, those were your front pages. So, kicking off the in-depth look with the Telegraph, Nicholas.
So the big headline is Rwanda migrants to be detained within days. Rishi Sunak has promised incessant, or what is the word, regular drumbeat of multiple flights. This looks like we are approaching the
skies
fateful moment.
Darken with them.
Yeah, at long last, the flagship policy of the Tories, which has faced so many obstacles so far, after so much prevarication and a parliamentary ping pong.
That's interesting you use that phrase, flagship policy. Would you genuinely believe it's a flagship policy?
I mean, at least in terms of media coverage, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, personally, it's my favorite policy.
But it's been at least it's been always checkered, isn't it? Always derided, always scorned, mocked, and of course it has had to try and overcome or work its way around numerous hurdles. I don't think it ever had even a long weekend of in the sun.
No, no one's ever really liked it, so it's a strange policy to sort of hang his reputation on, but that seems to be what he's doing, and he's really going for it now. And he did this speech earlier. People said it's a new Sunak. He said, no foreign court will stop us from getting flights off. He said, no ifs, no buts, these flights are going to Rwanda. So he's realised he has to be tougher. Farage was even speculating this means he's going to go for a summer election, whereas Choppers was saying no because, one, MPs want their pay, so they want to last as long as possible. And two, Sunak wants his legacy. He wants to say, well, I was there for 2 years. So it looks good on paper when he hopes everyone forgets what it was actually like.
Wow.
But it's a strange story, isn't it, a policy to make such a big deal. And it's, I just don't know if it connects with voters. I mean, it'd be good if they get it done, but would it change your vote? I mean, it's all about legal migration as far as I'm concerned, and the boats are sort of a smaller...
Well, exactly. What it has to do, the only way it's ever going to work as a mechanism is as a deterrent. The idea that we can take a meaningful number of people from the UK to Rwanda to ease the burden is nonsense. That's obviously not going to happen. So what it has to happen is that people stop coming across the channel in small boats if they believe that there's a good chance that they'll just be put straight on a plane to Rwanda. And that, I think, is going to be, even if it does ever work, I think it will take quite a long time, even with like an autumn election. I don't think that process will have... Do you think?
So it might be already too late. You're right.
Yeah,
we need to see how many are actually going. We will believe it when we see it. First of all, because of all these obstacles so far, and then if it actually does decrease the number of boats. But it's still something, and so many home secretaries and so many promises and so many disappointments so far, and so much mocking and derision. So we will see. But it's something at least to start.
I think the point about summer election, I'm sure some tweet will correct me, I think it was to do with Sunak getting the election before the ECHR have a chance to overturn this and humiliate him.
Right, yes, that's possible, yes. And also, I think he is going to depend on the elderly vote, and then, you know, they could easily decide not to come out in the middle of November. Anyway, The Guardian, Nick.
So The Guardian has Met Police Chief praises conduct of officer in anti-Semitism row. So this is Mark Rowley, of course, and he says the sergeant will not be disciplined. Now, in case anyone doesn't know, there was, of course, this police officer who told the guy from the campaign against anti-Semitism that he was openly Jewish, and it was a short clip. Then if you watch the much longer clip, although it's contentious, the officer does come across, in my view, a little bit better. He's more sympathetic, and that's definitely what Rowley's going with. He's saying that he was exemplary, basically. He says that the wider actions and intent of the officer were professional and in the best tradition of British police trying to prevent a disorder. I mean, maybe going a bit further than most would, but if you watch the full video, he tries to help the guy. He says it's not because he's Jewish, he's just creating a disruption. He's trying to look after him. He's saying, go around this way. He does speak to him for a long time and offer various help. I was a bit more sympathetic having seen it. There's still a fundamental problem of, obviously, you can't call someone openly Jewish as the reason for an arrest, and obviously the fundamental problem of the anarcho-tyranny of arresting the innocent remains a big problem. That's the fundamental absurdity, and they allegedly can't control these protests. That's the fundamental problem.
As we saw a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, with the chap, and again, Iranian, I think, wasn't it, who was had the banner saying that Hamas are terrorists, and he was the one that was arrested, and quite roughly handled, in fact.
That's the fundamental problem, and so that's why my sympathy is limited. But for the individual officer, when I watched the full thing, I think he was trying his best, and it is very, very difficult.
And you're right. I mean, they're as very often in these cases, they're trying to identify this Met police officer as the scapegoat for what has been allowed to develop over the course of a number of months of atrociously soft handling of a criminal element, certainly, or, I mean, by the standards of the hate crime legislation that's terribly fashionable now, I mean, half those marches.
That's what Metropolitan Police Federation, which is the union representing them, calls trial by social media. Obviously, the policeman might have had his heart in the right place. He maybe most likely wanted to protect the man. Obviously, it was very unfortunate, that expression, openly Jewish.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, people are sick of two-tier policing, as we have seen repeatedly. And we've seen the way they treated, for example, Tommy Robinson and all that. Going after people for tweets or for stickers. In Leeds, somebody was jailed, the lesbian Nana, all these cases.
But it's funny you mentioned Tommy Robinson. I remember a clip a few years ago, shortly after the Manchester Arena bombing, and there was a big kind of... I think it was after that, or possibly after one of the other Islamic terrorist outrages anyway. There was a sort of peace march in Manchester, and then Tommy Robinson was leading a less peaceful march, and the police deliberately led them into one another. It was quite obvious they actually precipitated the encounter, hoping, I think, I'm projecting maybe, that they would sort of, I don't know, bring disgrace upon both of them, you know, to demonstrate that they couldn't be trusted.
Can I just add one thing? Since you've invoked the dark name no one's allowed to mention, I thought you were going to mention the more pressing irony that the Jewish man who was told
Falter,
he was openly Jewish, Falter, was he told Tom Robinson to get out of his march. So some people are saying this is a sort of a karma, you know, that you're trying to ban people from your march. Now you've been banned from march. I'm not necessarily saying that, I'm just documenting it, pointing out the irony.
It is interesting, although I suspect what's going on there is Falter wanted to sort of purify the, you know, he didn't want to be stained, obviously, before he makes his own actions. I sort of understand that, but you're right, it's not simply a binary calculation.
One key difference might be, I suppose, people say, look, this is a guy who's getting persecuted seemingly for his ethnicity or whatever, his Jewishness, versus someone wanting to keep someone out for ideological reasons or because you disapprove of their activism or something. So there's a slight difference.
I think so.
Perhaps.
Moving on to the Mirror, Nicholas.
Jill Dando exclusive, Face of a Killer. This is a cold case, we could say a murder case dating back to 1999, and now there could be a breakthrough. God. Yeah, 25 years. Jill Dando was Crime Watch presenter, dramatically shot dead, and there was this X-man or otherwise unidentified person who might have been linked or incriminated. Nobody knew who he was, and now thanks to facial mapping, they have there's a good chance that he is no less than a Serbian Secret Service assassin who is already serving a 40-year jail term in Serbia for double murder.
Wow.
And that's someone the police might want to question.
He's been called Man X. When you call him X-Man, it sounds like he's one of those mutant superheroes. But it was always fascinating because people thought at first it was just a stalker, but it's like, no, it was an execution, it was a professional. People speculated to why was she exposing something. There's always these questions. I don't know. People can tell me who've watched the documentary. Also, the assassin bears a striking resemblance to the sweating man of an Ether of a suspect, so we know it's not Prince Andrew. That's the main thing to rule out.
It was so long ago. There were some really crazy theories about it at the time, wasn't it? Do you remember quite a number of things happened all in 1 week? I seem to remember that it was the same time as those nail bombs were going off in gay pubs in Soho. I might be wrong about that. I seem to remember a lot of stuff there was just a general... What? Like Jill Dando, it just seemed... I mean, it was obviously very sad, but also sort of absurd. She was such a... I mean, yes, you know, Crime Watch, but still, just a very sort of shiny, bright, happy, you know, upbeat presenter. It just seemed... And then there was that ridiculous fit-up. Do you remember that? The chap who had named himself after Freddie Mercury or something. Do you remember this? The guy whose name he gave the name was Freddie Bulsara, which was Freddie Mercury's real name. He'd adopted it as his name.
Okay.
And they pinned it on him, and he did a number of years in jail. I should dig it all out. But it was it was an absolute bizarre fit-up, you know, of Guildford 4 dimensions. Anyway, those are the front pages. In the next section, the pros and cons of policing and the pros who are conning you on Channel 4. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. You're very vexed about these China cyber attacks. Colin says, what the hell is our Secret Service doing? They've only just realised what China's up to. You just couldn't make it up.
We could have told you.
We knew. We're not surprised. So Colin, we agree with you. Quite why it's taken GCHQ or MI6 or whoever it is, MI5. It would be MI5 to know what's going on.
And Rod has said, thank you, Rod, if you know how you vote, if they know how you vote, coupled with mass data held also on you, do you not believe they can influence your decision-making process in any way? They won't know.
I'm not sure they know how you vote because that's
not on record anyway, is it?
It is not.
And Ken says these are only able to be carried out because of computers, internet, mobile phones, etc. It seems to me that these inventions are ruining our lives, and therefore we were much safer and much happier without these inventions. There is a school of thought that would agree with that, Ken, very much so.
I sort of often think it myself, really.
Me too.
The dark web. I mean, how many people have been murdered because of the dark web?
You do wonder as well.
Brianna Jai.
Yeah, you do wonder. I look at my kids' generation and I wonder whether they will grow up and have a complete rejection of all of this and they will just say enough because they will think we were all insane for having become so addicted to our phones. I wonder whether, as a generation after generation do, they will reject it. Wayne, blame Western governments for the rise of China. People were saying this 10 years ago and every country ignored it. That is a really good point, Wayne, because we've taken Chinese investment and obviously our houses are full of items we bought from made in China.
And if you remember as well, we had to get them out of the 5G. Huawei.
We did.
Get them out, literally extricate them
Yeah,
from
that
it.
was at least one thing I think they did quite well.
Yeah.
And Jan says if they've seen the electoral roll, what else have they been looking at? That's the threat to our democracy. They never do things by halves. I'm much more worried about my own government looking at what I do online, to be fair.
I want to say, go back, we said before, the electoral roll is a public document which you can access if you go to your library.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners with me, Simon Evans, still here with comedians Nicholas DeSanto and Nick Dixon. So we go across to The Guardian now, Nicholas, and 6 months on, finally someone is facing accountability.
That's right. Still with dramatic news. Israeli military intelligence chief quits over 7th of October attack. So this is Major General Aharon Haliva. And he is the first top brass military or figure to vacate his job because he has claimed responsibility for the deadliest assault in the history of Israel. He is the chief of, or was the chief of, Israeli military intelligence, which is one of the three branches. It's called Aman for short.
Right.
Most people know Mossad because Mossad is maybe more dramatic with their operations because they are the external. They're like the MI6 of Israel.
Or the CIA.
Exactly. Whereas Aman is a bit more low-key for us foreigners, but it's the most important one because they observe the military movements of the neighbours, or they're supposed to, and this is where the failure came.
There were two things that I remember from the time that that things come and go. There was some suggestion that, in fact, I assume his organisation, but military intelligence anyway, had in fact come to Netanyahu and said that there are these plans and that they were dismissed as unworkable and not practical. The idea that Hamas were going to break out in such numbers. So presumably, if he's resigning, I don't know whether he doesn't feel that he didn't gather enough intelligence or didn't. But I'm pretty sure that there was a claim at the time that they had actually briefed the government and it had not been taken seriously.
Conspiracy theories, or not so much theories, but Egyptians claimed they had warned the Israelis.
Right.
And so either way, they have either ignored or totally underestimated the movements and the indications.
This guy's probably hoping people believe the conspiracy theory because it looks better than him just being totally negligent. I mean, he was on holiday in a Red Sea resort, which probably didn't help, right? And they sort of called him. He wasn't even there. And so I'm amazed it's taken him this long to go. I mean, or for people to be sacked, right? Because it was so bad. So if it was just negligence, it was incredibly
To be fair, he's the first one who has resigned. And he did mention earlier that he was responsible. There's someone else who said he would be stepping down in, somebody from the army, head of IDF Central Command, Yehuda Fuchs. He said he is going to resign in summer. We need to understand they're also in the middle of a war on multiple fronts. So they can't simply renovate the top echelons so quickly in the middle of the war.
Although more than 62% of Israelis say they should resign.
course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
just throwing it in for balance. I know we've wandered into your expert topic here, though. It was all about the different branches of the secret police and stuff in Israel.
It is the most ridiculously catastrophic failure of military intelligence, isn't it? Especially considering their previous record, which was that, you know, if so much as a dog wandered into no man's land outside of Gaza, you know, it was mown down. It seems extraordinary that, as you say, that he would not have gone within 24 hours. I can't understand it. Anyway. Nick, the Met, on a considerably less impressive scale of intelligence, they have a morale problem. And to be honest, at this point, if they didn't, I'd worry for them. But
yes, indeed. Yeah, rock bottom morale, in fact. And social media piles on inside the Met's protest problem. This is in the eye. So, yes, we touched on it earlier because there was this individual police officer, the one we discussed in the first section, but there's a general lack of morale, as you say. As Nicholas also mentioned, people, they feel like there's social media pylons just waiting for them if they put a foot wrong. And, of course, one can be sympathetic for that. I mean, they're under-resourced, they've got no way of, they claim, of manning these marches. I think people would be more sympathetic if they were still seen as being on the side of the people, and that's the big problem. Because the police are essentially foot soldiers of the regime, for want of a better term, and that regime, we feel, is woke. We feel it's basically pro-Palestine, especially Sadiq Khan, you imagine, is. And therefore, how can they take a different view as police? They follow orders. So you just feel they're not on the public side, and the public would be a lot more sympathetic to a police that they felt were on their side. Even though individual police officers are great people, and they're doing a tough job. The police as a whole is a tool of the regime, and the regime is corrupt and despises the people.
Yep. Yeah. I think that, I mean, the term, you use it a lot, but this is obviously an absolutely Exhibit A is anarcho-tyranny. The disproportionate, it's not just two-tier, it's like wildly polarised, isn't it? Yeah. You can be, you know, hounded for absolutely nothing. And yet, I will say, the marches, which are obviously the main thing under discussion, they do present an extraordinary challenge because they've just come week after week on a huge scale, and I'm not quite sure what they would be able to do if they did feel that they were.
You'd have to send the army in at this point.
I mean, that's why some people argue for an ethno-state, because you wouldn't have these problems if you didn't have this huge, diverse element which believes in different values. But I feel for the policemen. Everything Nick said, I agree. Yeah. And you know, it's not a good job when you see adverts on the underground, and it says, become a policeman and you can start as much as £26,000. And these poor people, cold,
they get quite a decent pension,
rain or shine.
Anyway, same paper, and here's an upside to being in the police. They're more emotionally intelligent than they used to be, although emotional intelligence is usually rolled out when actual intelligence is somewhat lacking, isn't it?
Dubious term, right? Yeah. We are with the iNews story, right? Sadiq Khan, the police are more emotionally intelligent now. So this is another interview or dossier the I has done about, this time, the safety of women under Sadiq, because Sadiq Khan is ultimately also the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. So how has the Met been doing in terms of women feeling safe? We had this report by Dame Louise Casey, which was quite an indictment, saying the institution, that is the Metropolitan Police, is institutionally homophobic, sexist, and harboring those with racist attitudes. I'm a bit skeptical when it comes to structural racism because we hear so much of it, and it's so much ingrained with the ideology and the rhetoric of the woke. But nonetheless, this is Sadiq Khan, and he wants to. He's standing for election next month as the mayor of London, and he wants to assure the voters and women that they are safe, and they haven't been, and he acknowledges that. The question is whether or not they would believe he's the right person to make London safer for them, because he himself acknowledges that I want London to be a 24-hour city, but the night experience is very much different from women than men.
Well, also, bars and clubs are not closing at rate knots anyway, aren't they? Nightlife is in terrible trouble now.
There's so many annoying things about this piece. I mean, one of them, Sadiq Khan saying, it gives me no satisfaction for being shown to have been right in relation to challenges around the police service. His takeaway is that he was right because he means the police need more resources. He also claims the Mate campaign was a success, which is hilarious, because there was a small increase in a self-reporting YouGov poll, people saying that it made them change their minds afterwards, pathetic nonsense. He's obsessed with misogyny. I mean, left-wing policies put women at risk, you know, like weak border policies and weak on crime and so on. So now he's saying, oh, but I'm worried about women, but what are you actually doing about it? And probably until 10 minutes ago, people like him were claiming that women didn't even exist and anyone should be allowed in their changing room. So I find it disingenuous. Of course, crime's a big problem. Women need to be safe, but it's not going to be helped by anything Sadiq Khan does, especially the May campaign. Also, I heard that today a stat, something like 1 in 4 people in London experience violence or threat of violence or something. It's just horrendous.
And obviously the Met themselves have contributed a couple of high-profile races in the last few years, but I suppose that could stand out. They could be sort of outliers, possibly. It's, you know, the culture is under threat, but you're absolutely right. The other culture that is clearly growing in London is that of an indifference to traditional Western respect for women, right?
True.
Yeah.
You know,
and also, London surpassed New York as the murder in terms of the number of murders under Sadiq Khan.
Yeah.
So that's something to...
Well, something for New York to brag about, I guess. Telegraph now, they have news of the Pope's latest big hat, Nick.
Yeah, that's so obscure, I can't even link it to the story.
Pope has a big hat and the bear shit in the woods, you know the one.
Right. All right, I shouldn't have asked. So it's Channel 4 accused of left-wing bias over election night panel. And if you haven't seen it, there was a lineup of all the sort of usual lefty suspects. I said it was like Avengers Assemble, but they're all evil and they have no special skills. But it was a little joke. I'm not saying they're literally evil, of course, but it's people like Kathy Newman, who was destroyed by Jordan Peterson, amazed she still has a career, and she exposed herself as a total lefty. Rory Stewart, can't believe he was once a Tory, has talked about voting Lib Dem. Krishnan Guru Murthy, a sort of rude lefty. Emily Maitlis, lefty, who became even more lefty once she was freed from the BBC. Alistair Campbell, say no more. And Claire Balding, who at least can ride a horse. But that's their lineup for the elections. I mean, imagine if GB had an equivalent lineup, it would just be the apocalypse, but this is Channel 4.
But this is what people expect from Channel 4, to be fair, isn't it? They don't watch it for an unbiased, a neutral or balanced view. They watch it for left-wing propaganda. I remember during the election night in 2019, they were all looked absolutely devastated when the results came in. They didn't even bother to hide it.
They did, but it's state-owned, isn't it? So it's still, so it shouldn't really be the case.
And Tories shied away from selling it. That's another thing. But yeah, Channel 4, credit to Tories. Tory source has branded it the return of primetime comedy. Having a look at this lineup, looks like Channel 4 has taken a break from their incessant attacks on marriage. You know, the programs Open House, The Great Sex Experiment, Naked Attraction, Naked Education, Naked this, Swinging that.
Naked election coverage, that'd spice it up.
They basically want to be regarded now as one of those left-leaning podcasts, like the Newsagents and The Rest is Politics, right? Channel
but government,
well, they've got half the people off
got half that. Anyway, I do apologise for my profanity in describing the predictability of that particular scenario. Russian jams now in the Times, Nicholas, and presumably a sort of spreadable borscht, is it? I don't know.
Sadly not. A serious story. I don't know how to make this funny, but Russians, you did. The Russians jam sat-navs on British holiday flights. So different sources, including one which is called Breaking Defense, are saying that Russians are now basically using this practice of interfering with satellite, with GPS, over both military and civilian aircraft. So holidaymakers from a variety of companies, Ryanair, EasyJet, Jet2, TUI, these have all reported interference and problems navigating and locating when they are flying in the Baltic area, going, for example, to Finland, Sweden, because it's very close to Russia, and also they have this exclave called Kaliningrad, which borders Lithuania and Poland. So that's basically the story.
So, God, it's out of my comfort zone, I have to say, Nick. What do you think?
No, same. It just seems to be Russia flexing again, which they seem to be doing mainly by bothering Grant Shapps, which is a sort of a strange tactic, but it's something, I suppose.
Kaliningrad, is that the one that used to be...
Königsberg,
which is where Immanuel Kant was born.
Yeah,
that's
basically the heartland of Prussia, and that's why they took it for themselves.
Switches back and forth, like, anyway. Avoid further profanities. That's halfway. In the second half, we have NSPCC or NSDAP. Or is it smartphones that want to rewire our kids? We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Looking ahead to tomorrow, it's going to be a much drier and sunnier day for many of us, but there will be some rain, particularly across the southeast. That's due to this weather front that's still making its way southwards. Much of the rain will tend to fade away throughout this evening, but there'll be a real legacy of cloud left behind. So quite a murky evening for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast as well. We could see some drizzly rain for a time this evening. There's also a risk of some fog developing across parts of northeastern England through tonight. Further north and west, though, it will be much drier and clearer tonight. It's going to be quite a cold start tomorrow, but frost will be fairly limited to just some Scottish glens and perhaps the far southeast of England as well. So a chillier start to the day, but definitely a brighter start to the day for Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, Northern England as well. Across many western areas of Wales and southwest England as well, it should be a fairly dry and bright day. But sunshine will be a little bit more limited across the south coast, where there'll be some drizzly rain on and off through the day across the southeast. But it won't feel too bad in the sunshine if you're sheltered from that northerly wind. It's going to be a cold start on Wednesday, though. There's a greater risk of seeing a frost, generally, though, still in rural areas. We've got more of a northeasterly wind developing on Wednesday. That will bring in a few showers across the east coast, but in the west, it's going to be another fairly dry, bright and warm-feeling day in the sunshine. Looking ahead to the rest of the week, well, still some chilly nights to come, and it looks like it will turn a little bit more unsettled from Friday.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners. So the Times, Nick, to kick off this half, yet another charity appears to have been hollowed out like a gourd and crammed full of toxic waste.
Very nice, yeah. It's the NSPCC pushed trans ideology on children, whistleblower claims. This is Julia Marshall, 62. She had volunteered for 30 years, and she found that it had been completely captured by Stonewall. This is absolutely shocking. I mean, she was told to ask primary school-age children their pronouns, all right? And it said she first had concerns in 2019 when someone started putting she, her in emails. It's like the start of a dystopian movie, these little signs, this is how it begins. We're talking about children under 11. And at one point, they said to her, well, they were trying to get her to ask pronouns for children. She was like, this is mad, you're all crazy, right? And there's this bit where the NSPCC spokesman has actually replied to this and made it worse. They say something simple like using a child's preferred pronouns is one way in which a young person can feel listened to and respected. Children don't have preferred pronouns unless you teach them this garbage. When I was 11, we didn't have these pronouns. You brainwashed them and taught them this, so of course they regurgitate it. It's not a thing, and it's disgusting. And remember, this is the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. You had one job, is all I can say, and you failed.
Absolutely correct. I mean, we all talked about we've been talking for a long time about the long march through the institutions, you know, but sometimes you do kind of you assume some of them would be beyond the pale. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can understand Stonewall getting involved in the BBC or the newspapers or the civil service, but children's charities.
Still, unsurprisingly, they go for the kids because they want to get them at an early age. And talk about irony, cruelty, prevention of cruelty against children.
But this is how they always frame it, that it's a safety concern, that they're safeguard. It's the projection, the inversion of the truth is the most sinister aspect.
They have this ideology of gender affirming, and sex and gender are two things. So a child as young as 2 might have a different gender than their sex, and they might have, therefore, they don't know what pronouns are. They might have a favorite Pokemon, but
well, we thought. I mean, I'm going back. We've been doing this for a couple of years, but I remember very clearly when my daughter Matilda and her best friend Delphine were absolutely convinced that they were wolves. They believed that they had the spirits, the souls of wolves.
And they actually did, which was what was weird in that.
Very hard to affirm that with surgery, but we got there in the end. Anyway, Grindr news now, Nicholas, and claims they shared private information without consent, which kind of feels like, I don't know, kind of asking for it.
I mean, it's a sad day when you can no longer trust the integrity of people who are in the business of facilitating casual sex, right?
Yeah.
Gay dating app Grindr faces lawsuits from hundreds of users who claim private information, including their HIV status, was shared without consent. So it's not even their first time. They were previously, in 2021, they were fined £5.5 million for sharing user data to advertisers.
Yeah.
And this time, this lawsuit is brought by a company called Austin Hayes, and they claim thousands of Grindr users might be affected. Basically, their HIV status, among other things, and the time their last test was conducted has been provided to advertisers for potential use.
Provided to advertisers. Because that kind of stuff should be on your profile, right? Should it? Or I would assume it would be. Is it? That's not secret, is it?
You're asking the wrong person. I can't really relate to the story on at least 3 levels. I mean, not gay, don't use dating apps, hopefully don't have HIV unless a massive data breach tells me otherwise.
But how would you... I mean, there's the thing about... with the advertisers getting hold of data and using it to target you. I mean, I suppose I could imagine there might be some services that they present to somebody who's HIV positive, but it doesn't feel like it's the most valuable kind of information about you compared to your wealth or status.
It's valuable for you to tell, like, your boyfriend or something, isn't it? Very valuable.
That's what I mean. I mean, I'm assuming it's on the screen anyway,
right?
right? Anyway, I don't know. God, as you say, we're all out of our depth here, but yeah. I think, I mean, somebody said, that our friend Tamandra Harkness, who's been on the show a couple of times, some time ago, wrote a big book about big data and just said people are extraordinarily lax about how they tell these corporations things and then they're surprised when it gets flogged. I mean, that's what the business model is.
Yeah.
You know, you're generally speaking, you're not paying for these things. That's how they make money out of you. Anyway, Times now. Nick, one of my most cited authors is under fire, which could seriously undermine my credibility.
Yes, and he cites you a lot as well.
Yeah.
It's experts criticise author who claims smartphones rewired children's brains. And this is Jonathan Haidt, who has written a lot of interesting books. He's now got a new one called The Anxious Generation, claiming there's a link between young people being on social media and how depressed they are. And other people are saying, no, in fact, you should look at other metrics like suicide. But he's saying, well, no, suicide's so rare amongst this age group that it's not useful, and so on. It's kind of going back and forth.
Yeah.
Common sense tells you it's not great for kids to be on apps all the time and on phones all the time, and when they should be out running around. I think we all instinctively know that, but it's hard to prove.
I think the thing, and where he's come a cropper possibly on this, although I can understand why he's used the term, is by saying rewiring, and he has doubled down on that. It does suggest that he means that it literally changes the blood flow and neurology of the brain. And they're saying there is no evidence in fMRI scans or whatever that this has happened. And that, yeah, by overstepping, he may have undermined.
Yeah, but maybe it's literally talking about semantics. He acknowledges that he doesn't mean it's social media is 100% all the time harmful.
No.
But this row over methodology or over conclusions, I think, as Nick was pointing out, superfluous. They say suicides are not that high, okay, but he says, how about hospitalization? Suicides are supposed to be rare anyway. And, of course, we've discussed this, the case of suicides after cyberbullying, the case of Mali. On this show, we talked about that. So much vanity, comparing yourself with other people, not going and enjoying the nature, socializing, sports. That cannot be good.
It's like everything. Like it's the nexus for every activity, isn't it? Now, I remember there was a cartoon some time ago when, in the past, people used to read a book or watch TV or whatever, and now it's all just through the phone. Even just those things. So, I mean, even to the extent that you're just not using your hands in any other way than to scroll. I mean, little things like that, apart from all the obvious stuff of cyberbullying and so on, as you say, it feels like nothing should be that dominant in our lives. And I'm not sure it's good for adults either, particularly.
Oh, definitely not.
I remember one situation, this always sticks in my mind, about 5 or 6 years ago when we had a couple of friends who had children. They came to stay with us for a long weekend, and the husband just spent the entire time on his phone. And that was a bit weird afterwards. And then about 6 months later, they got divorced. And it was obvious that he was finding it difficult because they would probably already come to that conclusion but weren't sharing it. But I remember thinking there's something about the phone that you can just retreat to, whatever it is that you don't want to confront or deal with. The phone just offers you an alternative, mode of interface.
An alternative universe.
Yeah. And that, in a sense, that's not ideal either. That it's, maybe something could have been resolved more. Do you know what I mean? It's just...
It offers you a world that's sort of all about you. You're the central focus, whereas if you're in a social setting, it's not really about you. It's more of a group setting, right? Whereas on your phone, it's like you're sort of back into your own world and everything pertains to you in some way as the focus.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, I've probably said too much. The sun, Nicholas, this is exactly the sort of thing the sun would say, isn't it? I'm shining. Take the day off work.
Sign yourself off work. Overhaul of sick note system could see Brits use an app to take time off. Well, this is another policy of Rishi Sunak. I wouldn't call it a flagship policy. Next to his ban on smoking, which we might discuss later.
Carnival float policy.
He declared war. Was that Rishi Sunak who declared war on the so-called Mickey Mouse degrees?
Oh, that was years ago, wasn't it? First time I heard those. I don't know, but yes, possibly.
We've had so many. It's worse than Italy now. We've had so many prime ministers now. But anyway. As a way of easing the burden on the GPs and basically sorting out the triage procedure, there should be, or there will be an app trialed where for some, like a flu or one-time illnesses, workers can use the app to get the so-called sick note rather than bothering the GPs.
Rather than bothering an expert who can see through their tissue of lies. Very quickly, Nick, a couple of words on this.
Well, I'm just amazed that people are saying I've got flu and I just need 7 days off work. I'm going 7. These people are not in showbiz. It's frowned upon if you come in if you're not in a coma.
I did actually try and work this out.
Yeah, Leo Kearse takes your spot. Go on.
I think I've lost possibly 1 or 2 days in the last 10 years to sickness, I would say. Apart from the ones that I lost to the, worldwide sickness, during which I was absolutely fit and healthy and ready to work.
Again, this is my only headliners this month. I can't afford to be sick.
Right. Well, you model yourself on Arctic Explorers, Simon. So that's what that's about.
Just one last section. It's got tips for coping with growing old. So put the cocoa on. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
It's the first time we've had an admission from someone who, at least used to be very senior in the party, saying that this election is not about winning, really, for the Conservatives now. It's about mitigating the losses.
There is broad recognition that this election has already been lost and that it's about damage limitation. And it is really important because it's the difference between whether, if Labour win a slim majority, then the fight is on for the next election. I know it seems silly to look 5 years ahead, but it does make a difference, versus basically accepting that we have 10 years of Labour government ahead.
Having an acknowledgement that the Tories are going to lose and lose badly, disastrously maybe, having that acknowledgement coming from somebody so senior is very demoralising for everybody else in the party, but also doesn't it make it then look rather immoral for them to just drag on right through to maybe November?
Personally, I think Rishi Sunak should name the date now. I think he should name it for October or November.
In terms of reform, if they're only 4 points behind the Conservatives in the latest poll. Do we need to stop the narrative, which we have been using legitimately, saying, well, they're doing all right in the polls, but they won't win any seats? Do we need to change that perspective now?
I think it's really difficult to say. It depends on Reform's electoral strategy. There's a lot of evidence that in certain parts of the country with certain demographics, they do have a really good chance. So I think if they target seats in the red wall and other places where there's big disillusionment with the Conservatives and what they'd promised, I can't imagine that Reform are at the stage where they could take masses of seats. It's more about that portion of the vote that they'll be taking away that I think is going to result in that massive Labour landslide.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. The news that might be of more interest to me than you, Nicholas, in The Guardian. How to stop the existential acceleration of time.
Right. Try something new to stop the days whizzing past, researchers suggest. So this is another story about that Pope having a big hat. In Italy, we say to discover hot water. When you somehow state the obvious, is to discover hot water.
Can you say that in Italian, please?
Ha scoperto l'acqua calda.
Nice.
Or scoprire is the...
You should watch Ripley with Andrew Scott on Netflix. It's quite slow, but it's beautiful and black and white, and it's all set in 1960s Italy. And there's quite a lot of Italian dialogue with subtitles.
Okay.
Might help
Stop
you
sending people to other channels. What do you do?
Anyway, carry on. Yes.
Well,
you're saying it's obvious.
Here, so
it's obvious. Try something new, and this breaks the routine.
Yeah. So the idea behind this, Professor Martin Wiener is the co-author of the study, George Mason University.
Martin Wiener would like you to try something new.
Let's not go there.
What's Wiener in Italian?
Let's not go there either. But the idea is, if you show memorable images or if you expose yourself to novel experiences, because it's new, the brain tries to gather as much information as possible, and therefore it feels like time has slowed down.
I mean, I have to say, Nick, I used to be much better at this. I used to do quite a lot of night classes and try and learn new skills and actually go literally to classes for them. You know, I did stand-up comedy. I did as a class initially in improv. I did a journalism course. And they weren't all necessarily professionally intended to become professional. I used to really enjoy that. That feeling of learning something new does kind of drain away a bit after a while, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and time accelerates as you get older. It seems to... My days were a kind of joyless blur of work. So, yeah, if you did more... Childhood time is the longest, though, isn't it? Your dad's in the hardware shop buying paint and you just feel like it's about 60 years.
Your mum's in the supermarket talking to somebody at the cashier. There's got to be a sweet spot. More positive news in the Times, Nick. 71 is the new 40.
Yeah, about to turn 71, you're still a youngster. And it's basically about perception has changed. People used to think that 71 was old. Now people think 74 is old. It's not that different. But they say the trend towards postponing old age is not linear and might not necessarily continue in the future. Of course, those proponents of longevity escape velocity would disagree with that. The people who say that, I find that fascinating, that life expectancy is outpacing ageing so that we could become immortal in theory. That's quite interesting to me.
There are certain things I think you need to do in order to remain remotely young. You do definitely need muscle mass. I think that's important.
I like the way you gesture towards me.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think a bit of sun, even though it's apparently bad for you. I know
that's
it's
where
bad
I'm out
for you,
because I got that skin cancer. But yeah, Nicholas probably gets sun.
Dr. Marcus Wetstein, this is, by the way. Right? They have Weiner and Wetstein.
What's that in Iranian?
Now, being German, it should be Wettstein, because he's from a university in Berlin. So.
Yeah. But anyway, I follow a number of accounts that talk about anti-aging on Twitter, and the main thing seems to be maintain as much muscle, do resistance training at least once.
And also have a good pension fund.
That helps, certainly. And, yeah, fat address book. Something I am sure we can all sympathise with in the Times, Nicholas, where no one needs to be heckled by a suckling infant.
Yeah, that story was, I don't know, I wasn't sure about this story, how to feel about the comedian. Comedian defends ejecting breastfeeding mother over gurgles. So this was a show in Australia, Melbourne. The comedian's name is Arj Barker. I don't know him, but
I know him. Years ago.
He's a successful one.
Had a famous bit about Star Wars, but go on.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, this is a big show. 700 people apparently in, and there's this mom who is, it turns out she was breastfeeding the child, and the child allegedly, I never thought I would use the word allegedly in this story, but in this scenario, but starts crying or shouting. Some people say gurgling, so not much harm done according to some pundits. So it apparently distracts Arj Barker, and he politely asks the mom to leave. But then it turns out she was breastfeeding. Some women were not happy about that. They leave in solidarity. And he defends himself. He says, look, this was a 15-plus show.
Yeah.
The venue shouldn't have placed them there in the first place. So I'm a bit, undecided who's right.
Why are you
here.
undecided? You haven't done enough years of comedy, Nicholas, with respect. That's what he was right. I don't even need to know anything about it.
Exactly.
You can't have babies in the audience. It's 15+. You can't have people making noise at a stand-up show.
Maybe it's because I'm not famous enough to have moms eager to come to watch me with their babies. But if you're a good comedian, maybe he could have made a joke about it.
Can we, Nick? We've got just time to have your thoughts on Zoom fatigue, which I do find vaguely...
Zoom fatigue increases
very quickly
when you see your own face in video meetings, and it's just this bizarre finding that you feel more tired if you can see yourself.
Yeah.
Which is quite strange. They thought it was just women.
Not just because you look tired in the image.
No, you're just looking at yourself and you're thinking, oh, that's me, and that just fatigues you. I know it does for me.
Yeah.
Well, I watch myself on telly every night.
I know for a fact it is too tempting to look at me. I do wish I would go
People
away.
always look at you.
In Zoom meetings, I do kind of try and minimise my own face, because otherwise I find myself...
I am too tempted to look at you, Simon.
Yeah.
And it fatigues me. It really does.
Why can't it be me? Anyway... Those were the stories that we decided were the best, most exemplary ones from the papers for tomorrow. The show is nearly over. Let's take another quick look at Tuesday's front pages. Daily Mail, enough is enough. We're ready for Rwanda liftoff. The Telegraph, Rwanda migrants to be detained within days. Camilla looks delighted about that. The Guardian, Met Police Chief praises conduct of officer in anti-Semitism row. The Mirror, have face of a killer, namely Jill Dandos. The iNews, Rwanda plan won't work, Tory critics tell Sunak. And finally, the Daily Star, Britain's hardest psycho seagull. Sadly, we had no time for that. Well, that's all we do have time for. Thank you to my guests, Nicholas DeSanto and Nick Dixon. I'll be back tomorrow at 11 p.m. with Steve N. Allen and Scott Capurro. It'll be a fun to last. If you're watching at 5 a.m., stay tuned for breakfast. Otherwise, thank you. Good night.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Looking ahead to tomorrow, it's going to be a much drier and sunnier day for many of us, but there will be some rain, particularly across the southeast. That's due to this weather front that's still making its way southwards. Much of the rain will tend to fade away throughout this evening, but there'll be a real legacy of cloud left behind. So quite a murky evening for central areas of England, parts of Wales, the south coast as well. We can see some drizzly rain for a time this evening. There's also a risk of some fog developing across parts of northeastern England through tonight. Further north and west, though, it will be much drier and clearer tonight. It's going to be quite a cold start tomorrow, but frost will be fairly limited to just some Scottish glens and perhaps the far southeast of England as well. So a chillier start to the day, but definitely a brighter start to the day for Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, Northern England as well. Across many western areas of Wales and southwest England as well, it should be a fairly dry and bright day. But sunshine will be a little bit more limited across the south coast, where there'll be some drizzly rain on and off through the day across the southeast. But it won't feel too bad in the sunshine if you're sheltered from that northerly wind. It's going to be a cold start on Wednesday, though. There's a greater risk of seeing a frost, generally, though, still in rural areas. We've got more of a northeasterly wind developing on Wednesday. That will bring in a few showers across the east coast, but in the west, it's going to be another fairly dry, bright and warm-feeling day in the sunshine. Looking ahead to the rest of the week, well, still some chilly nights to come, and it looks like it will turn a little bit more unsettled from Friday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you could win our biggest prize yet. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like.